Hello, and welcome to the Solidarity Show, your weekly webcast where you get all your union news in these pandemic times. And I want to welcome my co-host Liam, the Assistant Secretary of the ACTU. I missed you last week, Liam. How are you going this evening?
I'm good, Emma. It's great to have you back. We missed you. It was a nightmare on my own. I'm so glad you're back this week because we've got a big show in store for us. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge traditional owners on the land on which we meet right across this country and pay my respects to elders past and present. But yeah, it's been a big week, Emma. What have we got on for us today?
Oh, well, we've got a good one. We've got an update from you, and we've got some questions.
Yep.
We're yet to stump you. Hopefully we can tonight. We've got a union hero from the front line, Al Stennings. He is a correction officer and CPSU delegate, and he joins us. We've got our regular, Francis Leach. He'll be telling us what we need to listen to, what we need to read, and what we need to watch. And we've got Dr. John Falzon, sociologist, author, poet. We can't wait to have him on. And of course, it's been a big week in terms of commemorating a huge comrade in Bob Hawke, and we've got a bit of a tribute to him this evening as well.
Indeed. I'm really looking forward to it tonight, Emma. It should be great.
So what is the big news this week? What do we unionists need to be across?
Well, look, this week, again, it has been a lot of discussion publicly, obviously, as public social distancing restrictions start to ease and more people start to turn their mind about heading back into workplaces and what safe workplaces look like. And we continue to press our campaign for those three really important reforms around work health and safety. And those are to make sure that we have good work health and safety laws that require employers to have the highest possible controls to protect workers in the event of COVID entering the workplace. That we make sure that bosses are required to notify work health and safety regulators. We've got some shocking stories we think that are going to be revealed later this week about some, pretty notable national employers that have not been doing the right thing on that front. And then most importantly, again, to continue to press the case with the support of those hundreds of thousands of people that have signed our petition around paid pandemic leave. Those have been the three really key focuses for our movement. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about JobKeeper from the government, and they've been floating ideas about cutting this short. And indeed, that would be horrendously dangerous, not just to the workers that are on it, but indeed to the economy and potentially crash the economy even further if JobKeeper were to be withdrawn early. But the government has announced that in June, they intend to, it's not clear on the process, review JobKeeper. Obviously, we continue to make the case that there are these arbitrary groups which we've spoken about regularly that have been excluded, whether that be short-term casuals or indeed temporary workers who have been excluded from JobKeeper and are really struggling through this period because they can't leave the country to go home. They can't access any of the welfare services. And because JobKeeper is cutting them out, they're actually being pushed out of the workforce even further. On top of that, we've seen actions from employers as they become emboldened through this crisis to start to ventilate their wish list about how they might change the industrial relations system, and really need to call out the fact that they are, sort of rapidly leaving Team Australia and these sort of bogus claims they've got in terms of stripping workers of their rights in potential IR reform. But I think that really contrasts against our message that Michelle talked about last week in terms of a jobs and recovery plan, and just how important it is for us as a movement as we move through this next phase into a recovery phase potentially, that we put working people front and center of that recovery. That means making sure that we've got good jobs, and we've got a clear position there that we want to see 2 million secure jobs created in any plan going forward, because clearly insecure work is a huge scourge that needs to be addressed, and this pandemic has really highlighted it. But it's actually on that, Emma, that I want to talk about some good news that actually just came out this afternoon. And this was the federal court's decision in the WorkPac case, which many people may recall followed on from a decision back in 2016 where a worker, Paul Skeen, and his union, the Mining and Energy Division of the CFMEU, took a case where essentially they said that this was a casual worker who, for all intents and purposes, was a permanent, and they won. And they found that essentially bosses just labeling workers as casuals and treating them like permanents meant that they should be paid like permanents. And he was successful in winning the right to be paid annual leave, carers leave, sick leave, and so on. That case was re-enlivened by a second case that WorkPac brought, and that decision handed down today again confirms that right. So it's a big win for us on insecure work and a great win for that union. And indeed, it green lights potentially further legal action as they now pursue underpayment claims and entitlements for many hundreds of workers in the black coal industry. So it has been a big week, Emma.
It has, and congratulations to all union members who have been involved. Now, we're going to just jump into some questions, if that's okay with you, Liam.
All right.
Okay, Liam, I've got one here from Tony. Given the PPE discussion, is it feasible for teachers returning to school to wear masks, and should they be able to source one?
It's a really good question, Tony. And look, we've spoken a lot about health and safety and the importance of PPE. I think what's really important to understand, and this is not just applicable for teachers, but for anybody, is that PPE is actually not the best possible control you can be implementing. What should be being implemented, whether it be in schools or any other workplaces, is proper controls that ensure physical distancing and so on. Now, I appreciate for teachers, that's not always practical. What is being advised for teachers is not a requirement to wear face coverings unless there are other reasons other than coronavirus for that to occur. So we wouldn't contradict that health advice, merely recommend that the best possible controls should be implemented in relation to things like physical distancing. And the advice at the moment is not that PPE should be used such as what you've described. The other thing, and this is possibly becoming less of an issue as the pandemic goes on, and indeed PPE supplies increase, but one of the issues that was really evident early on was the lack of availability of PPE. And there was a concern about the availability in particular for those workers that need it. So what we want to make sure is that PPE is available in particular for those who need it, and that those who need it are trained to use it. And there is a concern around face coverings that if you're not trained to use it, actually they can be more dangerous and not assist in as much as people might think.
Thanks for that, Liam. And I've got a question here from Liz, who sent through her question over the weekend, and that is, what happens when we go back to work offices? I work in the city, I have lots of people in one building. How do we socially distance while using things like elevators?
It's a really good question, Liz. So, many buildings, whether it be office buildings in the city or indeed factories out in our suburbs and regional centres, will have large numbers of people coming and going at exactly the same time. One of the things that's been discussed in the last few days is how important it is to have a discussion with employees and workers about how we can minimise those sorts of interactions. So when workers are returning to work, and it's important to understand, the advice at the moment is that if you can safely and practically continue to work from home, that you should continue to do that. But when work does resume, we should make sure that we are minimising those sorts of interactions. That should mean, with agreement of employees, considering how you might stagger start and finish times, consider how you might stagger lunch breaks to minimise the number of people that might be otherwise congregating in those common areas like lifts, like lobbies, like lunch areas. It's also important in particular for how you might allow employees to arrive to and from work and avoid the sort of peak hour public transport if that is the only way in which workers can get to work. So it's important to think about these things and make sure that workers have got a plan as to how they can minimise those sorts of interactions.
I've got another question for you here, Liam, and that is, are there any new requirements to keep workplaces clean?
So that's really important too. So we've put some stuff up, and I'd encourage everybody to have a look in the ACTU's Coronavirus Workers' Rights Centre. We've got some really good guidance there around cleaning. What is important is that, again, those common areas where there's regular touching, whether it be of furniture or equipment or tools or other things that are commonly used. We've made comments before about how hot desking is not appropriate through this pandemic, and there should be, significant cleaning undertaken in between people using those common areas. So yes, there are additional requirements. You should be requiring your employer to undertake additional cleaning through this pandemic, in particular in those areas where workers are touching different parts of equipment or furniture or using different spaces.
Thanks very much for that, Liam. And look, we've put up on the chat box, everybody, a link to those resources that Liam was just talking about. Feel free throughout the show now to put your questions on in there. We'll come back to them next week. That's all we have time for today. Otherwise, if a question comes to you, comrades, during the week, feel free to email solidarityshow@actu.org.au. Thank you, Liam.
So I think we're now on to, is it Union Heroes on the front line now, Emma?
Yes, Union Heroes on the front line. Now, I had a conversation with Al Stennings earlier today. He's at work this evening doing really important work. So we pre-recorded this interview for everybody. I'll play it now. Welcome to Al Stennings. And Al has been a CPSU delegate for 11 years, working in prison services for 14 years. For our viewers, Al, can you just take us through your job and what it is you do today?
Day to day. It's funny because it can vary from a very slow-paced, casual job to a very high-stressed, dangerous environment in a heartbeat. But look, I mean, majority of our day and what it should be, in an ideal world, is of a morning you rock up to work, you're unlocking the inmates from their cells, giving them a bit of freedom for the day to exercise. We count them, make sure that no one's disappeared overnight. You make sure they're fed for the morning. You provide them with their lists to say when they're going to work, when they're going to visits, what their exercise times will be, things like that. And basically for the rest of the day, you're there for case management needs more than anything. A bit of searching involved for security at the prison. The inmates will, when they're not at work, they'll come and see us with their general day-to-day problems, and we'll try to steer them to the correct person that can help them. We can't always help them, obviously, because we don't a lot of areas that we're not trained in, therapeutic services, doctoring, things like that, but we can hopefully steer them to the right people, get them through the day, and then at the end of the day, we reverse cycle. We count them again, make sure no one's escaped during the day. You feed them again, you pop them in the bed for the night, and all you do is during the night is a few safety checks to make sure that they're still travelling well and no one's self-harming or anything like that.
As a worker and in your union, and you've been a delegate for 11 years, so I'm sure you've been incredibly busy because this has obviously had a huge impact on your work. Can you just tell me a little bit about what you and your workmates are doing to try and protect your own interests in this as well?
Yeah, look, change is happening so fast and so rapidly. Units are being, what were formerly reward units, and inmates strive to get there. They're being absolutely decanted of inmates, and now they've changed to isolation units. So basically, an inmate comes in off the street, they need to be isolated for a period until we can ascertain whether they're well or not. So things like that have happened very quickly, and it's a big change to our environment. And a lot of the changes that are happening, like opening up new areas and new wings of the prison, and renovating old wings that were previously nearly decommissioned. And now they're renovating it and getting up and running because we need to build bigger isolation areas and things like that. So there's a lot of things going. The upgrades are happening so fast that I wouldn't say that they're at the same standard from a workplace health and safety of what we would normally expect.
We're joined by just so many viewers across the country, like everywhere from Grafton to Cairns to Northern Territory. Is there a message you want to leave your fellow union members and comrades before we finish up today?
Yeah, look, be watchful for each other in the workplace. There's a lot of people that don't cope with change as well as others. And look, I'd have to put myself in that category at times. I don't like things to change around me. And it emotionally drains some people. So watch out for each other. Watch out for terms that we've discovered that are being used. Terms such as command mode and state of emergency. Whilst we are in an emergency type of situation, don't be scared to ask questions when you hear these terms. We find that they are quite often thrown out in a meeting type of environment to effectively stop the questions being asked by staff because it's a state of emergency and we are in command mode. It's an empowering type of thing for someone to say. But ask the questions when they make statements as we're following health advice. What health advice are you following and who said it and where's the documentation? Ask those questions, find out why, because sometimes things like that are being said without a lot of substance behind it. And although one person has said that, this health authority has said something different. So don't be frightened to question them because you'll often find that's the case. And also be aware that in a prison environment, and there's probably many others, I would assume nursing and health are exactly the same. Be aware that staff in your area are going to work and effectively being told to ignore social distancing and things like that, because we're exempt from it. We are essential workers when we're exempt in the workplace. For instance, I go to work every day, I'm shoulder to shoulder with nearly 300 people in my service, and social distancing doesn't apply in most places. At a morning parade, I'll call meal parade or something like that, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by 65 inmates in that yard, and I could nearly toss a bit of paper and hit the person that's furthest away from me. So we're literally that close. So it's almost ignored in the environment. But the moment I step outside the door, I've got to switch back on and follow all the rules of social distancing and so forth. And then I go home to my family going, oh God, I was just shoulder to shoulder with 300 people. And now I'm with my family and I'm not allowed to go visit my mum and dad. And so it's a pretty strange thing to get through your head, and a lot of people do struggle with that. So it's important to look out for each other and talk to each other about it. Just talk through it sometimes helps.
So thank you so much for being so generous and talking about how this is impacting you, your colleagues and the system and the prison system. So on behalf of all our viewers, thank you so much. No. And we hope to have you on again soon now, and all the best to you and your workmates during this period of time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
How good was Al?
That was great. That was great.
Under extraordinary circumstances, prison officers are finding themselves in at the moment. And, you know, in the conversation he was talking about, it's kind of like having to be as careful as being on a cruise ship right now. It's like a cruise ship on land.
Well, it's really interesting. Like, I know we've avoided the sort of worst aspects of COVID in Australia, but we should not be under any bones about it. The risks that prisons face when it comes to a pandemic outbreak. I mean, let's not joke about it. In places like Iran, they were actually letting prisoners out because the risks were so great. So I can only imagine how anxious many of those workers have been over the last few months, especially leading into this pandemic. So it's great that we got Al. It's an excellent interview. So well done, Emma.
Yeah, great. And he's obviously working this evening, doing what he's doing to as a delegate and protecting fellow workers and not just the prisoners right now. So now
good segue into Francis. I think we've gone from a prison officer to someone who probably should be in prison, in my opinion. A cultural criminal. Hiya, Francis.
I'm well, mate. How are you? Hi, Emma.
Hey, Francis. What's something we should be listening to this week?
Well, I think all of us love a good conspiracy theory, and whether we'd like to admit it or not. And I've come across a podcast which is an absolute doozy. Now, the podcast is called Wind of Change. Now, remember that song by the Scorpions, Wind of Change, big hair metal band from Germany in the late 80s, early 90s?
Before my time.
Yeah, me too.
Wind of Change. So Wind of Change was a song that many people thought was synonymous with the end of the Berlin Wall. So it was released in 1989, 1990, became a huge hit all over Europe. And on the eve of the Soviet Union collapsing, it became a massive, massive song. It was associated with the change and the end of the Soviet Empire. Now, writer Patrick Redden Keefe is a writer for The New Yorker, and he's done a lot of work in that space, in the spook space, with spies and the intelligence services in the United States. And he kept hearing stories about Wind of Change and the song being, the anthem for the end of the Cold War. And what he kept hearing was that the CIA were actually responsible for writing that song as a soundtrack, as an anthem, as a piece of soft cultural espionage and subterfuge to fasten, to hasten the end of the Soviet Union. And he initially dismissed it and thought it was a load of rubbish, but it kept coming back over and over again. So last year he thought, stuff it, I'm going to finally follow up on this story. And he's made this crazy, brilliant podcast called Wind of Change, which does actually chase all the leads down all sorts of rabbit holes about Wind of Change and the Scorpions. And it starts in 1989. There was this big concert in Moscow called the Moscow Concert Music for Peace, where the Scorpions played. And it seemed to be this watershed moment in Russian-Soviet history. And he goes back there and talks to some of the people involved in that concert. And from there, you get introduced to a bunch of old spooks, old heavy metal guys. It just goes all over the place. But all the while, you can't help but think that he's right, that the CIA might have had a hand in writing Wind Change. So it's a rollicking adventure. It's a great yarn, and it's a little bit nuts, and I absolutely love it. I'll just click the link into the chat room here so people, if they want to click on it, can follow it up. It's available on Spotify at the moment. You can listen and binge it if you want all 8 episodes in a row, but it's on the other platforms as well, episode by episode, week by week. I think we're up to episode 2 this week on the other platforms. But, yeah, it's a great yarn. It's mad, but it's brilliantly told.
Excellent. Well, that's something to listen to, but what should we be watching this week?
Yeah, Liam, a little bit different. Something I absolutely loved. It's on Stan TV, so if you stream Stan, it's this beautiful coming-of-age drama called Normal People. So it's a teenage coming-of-age drama set in Ireland with a couple of school kids, Marianne, played by Daisy Edgar-Jones, and Connell, played by Paul Mescal. And it's just their story about the difficulty of Marianne's character being the really smart, difficult kid, the one that was a bit lippy and was very, very much a loner, and Connell, Paul's character, being the star of the Gaelic football team, and they start conducting this secret love affair, which they don't really want their friends to find out about. It's just beautifully told, wonderfully acted, and I've always been a sucker for a coming-of-age story. This is the best one I've seen in ages, and it's one you can watch with your kids, or your adult kids anyway, your teenage kids. And, yeah, I just really enjoyed it. If you're looking for a bit of escape and you like a bit of the Irish countryside, a bit of Gaelic football, this is a brilliant little story. It's called Normal People. It's on Stan TV, and I highly recommend it. Something a little bit different.
Touching, Francis, and thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks, comrade.
I better get back to Dale.
Next up, we have a very special guest joining us, renowned sociologist, author and poet, Dr. John Falzon. Dr. Falzon is a senior fellow at Per Capita think tank and was previously the CEO of St. Vincent de Paul. Such a warm welcome from the Solidarity Show to you, John.
Thanks very much, Emma.
We'll just hop right in. John, you've recently written about the social and political dangers of the response to coronavirus. What are some of these dangers?
Look, we've seen a great example of the neoliberal wish list yesterday from the Australian Industry Group, calling for, removing leave entitlements, more casualisation, below award EAs. We've seen calls for more tax cuts for corporations. In other words, the danger is the market logic, the logic of the market, offering itself as the solution to the very problems it has caused. That's what we're dealing with. The twin enemies of austerity and atomisation. In other words, cutting the rug from under our feet, selling off the public sphere. The purveyors of neoliberalism hate and loathe the public sphere. Why? Because it reeks to them of democracy. They sell it off and sell us out. These have been cumulative dangers, and we're seeing them in action now. As for the atomisation, trying to break up our notion of the collective, our practice of solidarity, taking away social protection and trying to undermine the union movement. All of these are dangers, cumulative dangers. We're living in a time of pandemic, but let's not forget, we have been living in a time of the historical unleashing of the global disease of neoliberalism for many years now, and this was deliberately released upon us. And so, when we look at the pandemic, we need to look at it through that lens of the kind of society, the kind of economy that has been built, and the gains that the working class has won that have bit by bit been denuded.
It's a really good point, John. You talk a lot about how neoliberalism has sort of wrecked Australia and made us a lot less equal and much more exposed during this pandemic to sort of the really adverse effects. And we talk a lot about casualisation and how casual workers are really now at the sort of sharp end of this pandemic. to everyone that's watching, what is neoliberalism? What are some of the other things that we should be looking out for in terms of the things that both, as you rightly point out, industry advancing into the future, but what's some of the things that have left us really critically weak at this time?
So, there's a beautiful quote from the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, and he says, neoliberalism is a program for destroying collective structures which may impede pure market logic. It says it all. It says it all. I like to think of neoliberalism being a bit like the proverbial playground, and it's ruled by a handful of bullies who do unspeakable things to the rest of the student population. Now, the neoliberal governments, such as the one we have now, would like to pretend that it's like a school principal who is benign and sort of says, look, let's just leave things be and not intervene, and things will sort themselves out in the end. But no, neoliberalism is far worse than this. Neoliberalism is like that the principle, not standing aside, but actually arming the bullies with sticks and telling their intended victims to stand still. And, the union movement is so hated by the purveyors of neoliberalism because instead of standing still for those who wield the sticks, we stand up to them. And so we have seen this played out, across the full range of social and economic protections that we now see in great highlight and contrast. We now see how desperately we need them. Very simple, human needs. The right to a place to live. We need to basically triple our stock of social housing in the next 15 years, or we'll be looking down the barrel of accelerated and exacerbated homelessness and housing stress. Place to live, place to work. We need a job guarantee, and all we keep getting is a putting the boot into workers and unemployed workers plan. A place to work, but also the insurance of social protection for those who are excluded from the labour market, whether it's because of unemployment or because of studies, caring responsibilities, living with a disability, age, whatever the case may be. We need a new social security system that protects people, that helps people instead of hounding them and harassing them. But these are the very areas that neoliberalism likes to eat away at. So place to live, place to work, place to learn, and a place to heal. It goes without saying, if we don't have a robust public education system, from early childhood through to TAFE and university. I mean, there's a classic case of what neoliberalism has done. TAFE should be regarded as a national treasure, but it has been systematically wrecked by those who can't handle this notion of the public sphere.
John, one of the most powerful arguments used by defenders of neoliberalism is that there's no alternative to market-driven inequality. They say that it's a natural part of human society. What do you say in response?
Yeah, they like to tell us we're dreaming, don't they? They say, look, this is reality. You remember Margaret Thatcher, coined that TINA, T-I-N-A. There is no alternative. There is no alternative. So suck it up, and it's going to be better for all of us. The key is this. Yes, they tell us we're dreaming. We are dreaming, but when we dream alone, it's only a dream. As the beautiful Brazilian indigenous proverb reminds us, when we dream alone, it's only a dream. But when we dream together, it's the beginning of reality. And it is incumbent upon us, rather than to allow the problems to be framed by those who want to preserve an unjust status quo, rather than allowing them to frame the problems and then leave us reacting and sort of saying, how can we apply our knowledge to fix the problems that they have framed? We need We need to frame the problems and the solutions. They need to come from working people, because the reality is, for those who say nothing can change, things have changed. Things have changed enormously globally and in Australia. We have seen a magnificent history that we can be proud of progressive social change, the struggle for social justice. But here's the thing, I can think of no instant of progressive social change that did not come from the people under the guiding stars of struggle and hope. That it doesn't come from above, So if we want to accept that frame that's been imposed, that there is no alternative, that's exactly what we will do. You asked earlier about what are some of the dangers we're facing. Well, the austerity and the atomisation, in a sense, they're not a danger, because we know they're upon us, and we know they're going to be wheeled out, on steroids. The danger to us is if we accept that imposition, if we accept the fact that third rate is good enough for working people. We need to be ambitious for our class. We need to dream big, because people, all of us, deserve a fair crack at happiness.
I think it's a really good point you make there, John. I think one of the things that this pandemic should act as a bit of is a marker. I mean, we've had 30 years of neoliberalism, trickle-down economics, where we've essentially derided the role of government as a society for now so long. But yet the pandemic really thrusts that sort of collective institution back to the forefront. How do we sort of, to the practical aspects, what should we be doing to make sure that it doesn't continue just to be pushed into the shadows again as we move beyond the pandemic? What's the practical things that we should be saying right here and now should be done?
Look, I think our best bet is to emphasise that which we cannot achieve by ourselves, but must be achieved by government. In other words, our collective dreams, our collective aspirations. These can only be achieved when we have government that is informed by ordinary people's needs. Then we move towards the kind of society that is predicated on the very simple principle of from each according to their ability and to each according to their needs, unlike the current governing principle, which is, to those who have much, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, even the little they have will be taken away. So the very practical steps that I believe we as a movement must emphasise is that area of commonality. We've already seen more people wanting to join with us, because they feel that sense of we cannot deal with these things alone. So we need to harness that new energy. We need to listen to those stories. We need to share our collective story, because it's a good one. It's a powerful one. But in all of that, we need to emphasise the fact that it is only through that public sphere that we are able to lift the standard of living, lift the social protection, share that sense of solidarity, so that no one is left out from those essentials of life.
John, a little while ago you wrote that we need to do the hard work of hope. What is the hard work of hope, and what should be making unionists joining us this evening feel hopeful about?
I do think hope is hard work, because it's a word that can be used quite glibly, like the Prime Minister's thoughts and prayers, but it is anything but glib. Hope is hard work, but it is a beautiful way of engaging in the struggle. In fact, it is the only way, because all of those systems of oppression, all of those partners in social crime, neoliberalism, patriarchy, colonisation, ableism, ageism, homophobia, transphobia, all of those ways of trying to dehumanise us, all of those attempts to humiliate rather than to embrace humanity. That they are all predicated on the idea that we should give up hope, that we cannot resist, that it's a done deal, and that we're on our own, that our story is our story alone. Well, each story is, of course, unique, but our stories are shared. Our stories have so much in common, particularly our experiences of injustice. And for those of us who stand in solidarity with people, whatever their struggle, we know how real that beautiful principle of an injury to one is an injury to all really is. So, the perpetrators of social crime, the offenders against our common ground, our sense of the common good, we know how they behave, and they would love nothing more for us to fall into a state of despair. And what does despair mean? It means there's nothing we can do. It means believing there's nothing we can do. I would say opposite to that is not this unbounded hope necessarily. For some of us, we might be feeling beaten and bruised, but even if we've got the tiniest nugget of hope, a tiny nugget so small it could be mistaken for despair, but if we've got that tiny nugget of hope that there is something we can do, that's what we've got to cling to. That's what has kept our movement strong. That willingness, that absolutely indomitable spirit that, we will keep on fighting. We'll fall, we'll fight again, we'll fall again, we'll fight again. We'll keep on fighting, we'll never give up. That's what hope means. It's something you live. It's something you breathe. It's something you believe in because it's something you do.
Dr.
Very, very, very good there, John. That's a lovely message, I think, to leave us on tonight. I think a really powerful idea for us to go away and think about. And it's definitely got a lot of discussion going in our chat, lots of people sharing their thoughts, all very favourable, John. So thank you very much for coming on tonight. We've obviously got other engagement with John coming up over the coming weeks. So, encourage others to get around those as well. So thank you, John.
That's right.
Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. And that's right, Liam. Next Thursday, 12 to 1 o'clock, the Australian Trade Union Institute will be running a webinar with John on politics, poetry and class. And you've just got 10 minutes. You're not going to want to miss that one. No. So that's excellent. This week, everybody, we would like you to bring your friends, your workmates to the show. So the first thing you've got to do is take a look at the chat box, sign up to Politics, Poetry and Class. There's a link there for next week. There's also going to be a link to the Australian Trade Union Institute Facebook page, like that. Every week you will get the announcement of the special guests and what the program's going to be, like the Facebook page, and then share and invite at least 3 friends, Liam, at least 3 friends to the next Solidarity show.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, get onto it, everybody. It's important to get more people watching so we can spread the word. So really important. Thanks, Emma. Look, finally, on Saturday last week, we marked the passing of a union legend, a former president of the ACTU, Prime Minister of Australia. The passing of Bob Hawke was indeed last Saturday a year ago. Tonight, we're going to leave you and say goodbye tonight with a video by union historian, the other Liam, Dr. Liam Byrne, on Bob Hawke's life and legacy. Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name's Liam and I'm a historian for the union movement. And today we're remembering former Prime Minister and ACTU President Bob Hawke, who died last year on the 16th of May. Now, Bob joined the ACTU as its advocate in 1958, representing the union movement to the Arbitration Commission, which was the centre of the industrial relations system at the time. He was a tireless and brilliant advocate for working people, and every year he would argue for an increase in the wages for all Australians. These cases became legendary. So in those days, we didn't have enterprise bargaining, Instead, we had thousands of awards which covered the workforce, and each year the union movement would argue before the Arbitration Commission for a wage increase for everyone. Hawke's biographer wrote about one hearing where he spoke for 12 consecutive days for a wage rise for working people. By the end of it, he was so exhausted that he could only prop himself up by standing against a desk. In 1969, Bob was elected as ACTU president, and he led the union movement until 1980 when he entered Parliament. Under his leadership, the ACTU spearheaded a series of important industrial campaigns and even led a general strike to defend universal healthcare in 1976, with 2 million people recorded as having taken action on the day. He is also well known for his acts of solidarity, with his fierce support for the anti-apartheid movement a particularly prominent example. And he was also legendary for his singing of the song Solidarity Forever. In 1983, Hawke was elected as Prime Minister, leading a new Labor government. His government worked closely with the union movement in an agreement known as the Accord. Under this agreement, Hawke and the ACTU worked together to create and deliver substantial reforms: Medicare, national workplace health and safety changes, universal superannuation, just to name a few. We won't forget you, Bob.